There's something about old Citroens that just gets you right here. I don't know what it is, but over the next hour, perhaps I can show you something of why I and many other people just love these old cars. So much of the appeal of Citroën is bound up in its history. Now, this is the private museum that Citroën has set up in its factory outside Paris. So it's a very good place to start the story of Citroën. The Citroën story really started in 1900 when, as a young engineering student, André Citroën visited Poland, and by chance he saw a set of gear wheels with V-shaped teeth like this. Now he immediately realized the potential. He hurried back to Paris, and after his national service he took out a patent on these gear wheels and he set up a factory in Paris to make them. Now he was a tremendous success. By 1907 he got sales offices in Moscow, in Brussels and in London, and his gear wheels were being used in heavy engineering all over the world, including, interestingly enough, the steering gear of the Titanic. In 1912, as a successful industrialist, he went to America. He met Henry Ford, and he watched the mass production of the Model T Ford. Came back to Paris inspired by his experience and wanted to make a car for the masses, but his ideas were thwarted by the First World War. André Citroën was called up as an artillery officer, and he very soon saw his army starting to run out of shells in the grim trench warfare. So he went to the government with a plan to mass produce them. The government gave him a contract to make 1 million at 24 francs each. He built and equipped a new factory in the heart of Paris, and by the end of the war, he'd made over 23 million shells. So when peace came, Citroën, by then 40 years old, had a factory, machine tools, a skilled workforce, and the capital to make his first foray into the car business. The workforce weren't just skilled, they were fit as well. Look at these exercises they had to do every morning, and we thought it was just the Japanese who did this. Now, with that experience of mass production, Citroën decided to make a car for the people, and this was it, the Type A. Now, it was cheaper, it was more economical than any of its rivals, and yet despite that, it came fully equipped with a hood, with electric lighting, with a starter, and even tools as standard. It was a great success, and within 2 years, he'd sold 12,000 examples of the Type A. In 1922 came the famous 5CV, the Cloverleaf. Now this was the first car that had really been aimed fair and square at women drivers. Normally they were painted bright yellow. This one's red, just to prove the point. And in 1926, the factory opened in Slough in England, and Citroën started making cars over there. This is the Cloverleaf from the Slough factory. Steering wheels on the other side. Next up came the equally successful B-Series. Now these cars came in a range of body styles, like this fabulous two-seater Caddy, but they also came as four-door saloons, you name it. The bodies were made of steel instead of being based on wood frames, and Citroën said that made them a lot safer, and he wasn't afraid to demonstrate it either. And he also wasn't afraid of the odd publicity stunt. Could one of the new steel-bodied cars take a bus full of people on its roof? You bet it could. The B12 in 1926 had another world first. For the first time, and an amazing invention, the rear brake lights came on as you pushed the pedal. What a surprise! The opening of the Citroën factory in Slough in 1926 and the opulent Citroën showrooms on London's Piccadilly was marked with magnificent banquets that the great and the good of both Britain and France attended. This reflected the enormous success of Citroën in the United Kingdom, far outstripping any other importer. By 1928, Citroën had introduced the C-Type. This is a coupe de ville. You travel in luxury in the back, I, the chauffeur, am exposed to the elements, but nevertheless, the epitome of luxury motoring. The C-Series came in both two-seater, in four-seater, saloon, doctor's coupe versions, and was a great success. It was called the Chryslerization of Citroën. It was thought that there was a great deal of American influence on the C-Type's design. The 8CV cars followed in 1932, and a famous series of stripped-down Rosalees built on the C-Type chassis and engine were destined to set numerous long-distance and endurance speed records. By this time, Citroën was well established as a truly international business, with offices not only throughout Europe but in the Far East and South America. And Citroën was doing more than just build cars. He was marking a revolution in the marketing of cars. He had a natural flair for publicity. By night, his name was flashed up the Eiffel Tower in letters 100 feet high that could be seen from 60 miles away. Once a month, he bought the entire back page of France's most popular newspaper to talk about his factories and their products, and he had aircraft writing the Citroën name in smoke over the capital. He threw a huge party to welcome Charles Lindbergh, first man to fly the Atlantic. And he presented Josephine Baker, the famous cabaret dancer, with her own black Citroën. It seemed he was never out of the news. With his taste for gambling, he won £50,000 in 6 hours in Deauville one night, and for the Paris high life, he was the embodiment of the roaring 20s. Over 5,000 taxicabs run by Citroën's own taxi company circulated round Paris, painted black and yellow with the double chevron on their doors. At its height, Automobile Citroën had annual revenues of over £1 billion francs, making André one of the richest men in the world. And part of the publicity was the famous expeditions in cars like these, conventional Citroën models equipped with half-tracks at the rear, enabling them to cross snow or sand. Quegres, as they were called, cars like these were to embark on internationally publicised trips to places no vehicles had been before. Across the sands of the Sahara, from Algiers to Timbuktu and back, then from North to South Africa, and finally from Beirut to Peking, fighting their way across the Gobi Desert and through completely uncharted territory where not even footpaths, let alone roads, existed. But it was this car, the immortal Traction Avant, launched in 1934, that was to send shockwaves right round the motor industry. It was a car that was so far ahead of its time, it set the standard for the modern car of today, almost. And it was the car that really cemented the Citroën legend, and yet it was to break the man himself. In 1931, Citroën had again visited America, and the Budd Corporation had shown him a revolutionary new idea how you could build a car body as a complete monocoque without a chassis. Citroën adopted the idea with huge enthusiasm. He came back to Europe really fired up and set to work on his new project. He set his team a breakneck timetable for the design, development and production of the car. They said they would need 6 years. He gave them 4. The car was to have long, low, all-steel bodywork with no chassis, flat floors, independent front suspension, an automatic transmission, plus front-wheel drive. Front-wheel drive, of course, was not new. It had been used in the industry before, but this was the first time it was going to be in a car mass-produced. Why was Citroën so keen on it? Well, as this animation of the time shows, by making a car front-wheel drive, you pull it along. It makes it much more stable, both in a straight line and when it's cornering. When the development process looked like running out of steam, he brought in a brilliant young engineer, André Lefebvre, who became the father of the Traction. The exterior and interior styling of the new car was to be left in the hands of an Italian sculptor, Flaminio Bertoni, a man who had never designed a car before, but who went on to lay out an immortal shape. But not content with a revolutionary new car, Citroën went one step further. Now, he'd never got on with his great rival, Louis Renault. Unexpectedly, Renault invited him one day to see the new Renault factory in Paris, and Citroën was deeply impressed by the scale and sophistication of it. Over dinner, Louis Renault said to him, What about a new idea? I'll make the cars because we're so good at it, and you're such a good showman, you can sell them. Well, Citroën, of course, was deeply insulted and went back determined to make his factory bigger and better than Renault's. Now, they said it would take him 3 years to build a new factory. In fact, he tore down part of the old one and he had a new one up and running in 6 months, a prodigious achievement by any standards. And at the same time, he kept production going. Unbelievable. But the storm clouds were gathering worldwide. Car sales were plunging, the Traction development was not going well, and it was swallowing huge sums of money, and the factory development costs were astronomical. Citroën himself, by now in his 50s, was not a well man and working under intense pressure, and those huge profits had changed into mountainous debts. By late 1933, the launch of the new car was a race against time, with development staff working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. At the last minute, the automatic was scrapped, it just wouldn't work, and a 3-speed conventional gearbox and clutch was installed inside the casings. That was something the engineers had foreseen and planned for. And the car was launched in May 1934, but still facing a number of reliability problems. However, the reception by press and public was rapturous. At the Paris show in October 1934, Citroën showed some 15 variations of body and engine combinations to record crowds. In Britain, one magazine hailed it as the car we could not overturn. However, the factory could, and they did, to show how safe and solid the new body construction was.
La valse, le looping, par la nouvelle 7 à traction avant, carrosserie monocoque sans châssis. Tout va bien, la promenade continue.
And attraction was driven by the famous long-distance Citroën driver François Lecoq from Paris to Moscow and back non-stop in 48 hours. And when you think of the state of the roads at that time, a fantastic achievement. But it was all too late. In December 1934, a small creditor, the company that actually made the steering wheels, started bankruptcy proceedings, and Citroën lost the lot. He'd given his own personal shareholding to the Michelin company, who took over. André was banned from his beloved factory, and in July 1935, very ill with stomach cancer, he died. But of course, this wasn't the end for Citroën, and in part 2 I'll be driving a classic Traction, meeting Citroën enthusiasts at the London Design Museum, and investigating how the 2CV was designed for egg carrying and for drivers with big hats. Join me again soon. Hello, I'm Chris Goffey and welcome back to the amazing story of the Citroën company. The Traction Avant was launched in the mid-1930s and it caused a sensation in terms of the unique styling, the body construction and technological breakthroughs. The Traction Avant had been a hugely successful gamble. So well did it sell that within 2 years the Citroën company had paid off all its debts. It was to remain in production for 23 years, selling some 760,000 examples worldwide. Michelin had ironed out the bugs after only 1 year in production. That was proved by the inimitable François Lecoq, who drove one from Paris to Monte Carlo and back every day for a year, covering almost 500,000 kilometers.
This was the first car having classical wings without sideboards. Never people saw that before. So this was revolutionary about that car. It was a whole body. It was new because of its monocoque chassis, which was not the first time ever made, but one of the most popular cars who brought it into the public.
I think you do find a lot of the Citroën owners, you know, once they've got a Citroën, they will carry on. There is something about them that attracts you. And I mean, people say to me, Why Citroën? You can't really give an answer to it. It's just a case of, you started, so you finish. And as far as I'm concerned, the Citroën Car Club has been my hobby anyway for nearly 40 years. So I don't know what I'd do without it.
So here we are in the museum's 1954 Traction 6. Starting up, slightly different from modern cars. Switch on. Now you might think that's S for starter, but it's not. It's S for strangulator, which is choke, and D is for démarrage, which is starter. Find the handbrake. The wonderful gear linkage, which came about when the automatic gearbox didn't really work in the Traction. They went back to a manual one. And away we go. Such a lovely car, this one, and in beautiful condition. The impact of the Traction on automotive design is so strong that this year the Design Museum in London put together an exhibition to celebrate the work of Bertoni. So from Paris to a sunlit embankment, Tower Bridge in the background, and a wonderful array of Citroën cars, because here at the Design Museum they put on an exhibition of cars that celebrate the work of the great Citroën designer Bertoni and some of the beautiful cars that he designed.
The Design Museum celebrates all design, modern design, but we felt that vehicle design would be a particularly popular subject to look at. And we wanted to celebrate the work of Flaminio Bertoni because he was one of the preeminent car stylists of the 20th century, and his output, as I hope you can see behind me, was prolific.
Bertoni was working for another coach builder, and that coach builder was a subcontractor of Citroën. And staff of Citroën saw Bertoni at work, and they said that guy is brilliant, and they recommended to André Citroën to hire Bertoni, and this is how Bertoni came to Citroën.
It's a beautiful shape. If you look at it, basic shape for 1934, it was a real design icon. They actually the first car that was wind tunnel tested. My advice to anybody who wants to own a Traction is go buy one, because once they've bought one they will find that the pure aesthetics of it and the comfort of driving it, the comradeship of the clubs, it really works out.
The model is beautiful, isn't it? It's a model of a Citroën Traction, and I liked the model so much I bought the car. This is my very own Maurice, 1949, Belgium built, would you believe, Traction. The wide body, lots of room in the back, huge rear seat, cruises at 70 miles an hour if you like on the motorway, truly practical, bit scruffy round the edges. I must get round to restoring it one day. Now, one of the most beautiful features of the Traction are these beautiful sweeping wings. Now, I was in France a couple of years ago, and an old man came up to me with tears in his eyes and said that he was in the resistance during the war, and did I know why the wings were like this? And I said, no. He said, you lie on the wing and you push your rifle next to the headlamp and you can be driven up to an ambush, fire, and then be driven away still lying on the wing. I thought, wow, I never thought of that. So we've walked a few hundred yards away from the Design Museum to look at a car that a Traction Owners Club member has parked on the street here. Peter, when did you get the Traction bug?
Well, when I was a boy, I saw a fleet of these come past, and I thought, that is the car for me. I want one of these.
And how long did it take you to get one then after that?
About another 15 years, I imagine.
Saving up your pennies.
That's right, yes.
So what is this car? Well, tell us about it.
This is a 1949 French Traction Avant. And I've had it about 10 years. They're not so good in traffic. You've got no synchro on first, so I find that a bit hard going.
Double declutch down into first.
Yes,
yes. Oh, well, let's see how it goes.
Thank you.
And no synchromesh on first?
No synchromesh on first. And I find doubly declutching is a lot easier said than done, personally.
And built-in air conditioning on the Traction?
Yes. Air conditioning, and also a town and country hooter, I think we ought to say. This is for the town, for pedestrians.
Yeah.
Wait till the taxi goes. Little quiet one, and then for the others. And how many cars have got that feature?
How often do you open the windscreen?
Oh, in the summer I leave it open. Yeah, it's lovely. It's just air flowing through.
And windscreen wipers, I always think designed by M. Mouse.
I'll demonstrate. There we go.
In 1938 came the six-cylinder version of the Traction. In France it was known as the 15, but in the UK at the Slough factory it was called the Big Six. It was built alongside this, the Light 15. Of course, the British cars had leather trim, they had wooden dashboards and Lucas 12-volt electrics. Very superior. Like most classic cars, you need a really good owners club behind you if you're going to run one of these things. Now, Paul, you're the chairman of the Traction Owners Club. How important is the club to people running the cars?
The club's very important to all the members. We have about 600 members worldwide. They constantly supply parts, source parts from all over Europe for the members. New body panels are a problem. They will always be a problem. Second-hand body panels are available. All the engineering parts can be reconditioned, but certainly body panels, and to have wings handmade is a real big problem. But we'll approach that if and when it happens. But there's enough second-hand parts available at the moment that we can still repair and recondition. I've servo brakes added on. Some people are putting the later engines from the DS's in the Tractions, and we're making them very, very fast, and making them much easier to use. But but you have to keep the originality. It's very important to within reason keep the originality, so we don't change them that much.
But I was always told that if I bump started my Traction, it would strip the crown wheel and pinion.
Well, that's right. The gearbox is the weak link on the Traction. It was put together in just a few weeks, if you remember, in the 30s, and that's the one thing you mustn't do, is to bump start the Traction.
After World War II, production of the Traction Avant in 4- and 6-cylinder guise continued, and a post-war demand for cars in Europe saw production rates rise to levels not seen since the 1920s. At Slough, the majority of cars made were shipped to Commonwealth countries, where it proved exceptionally popular on rough roads in the outback and the veldt. But at the same time, Citroën was planning to launch its definitive people's car, the TPV, Toute Petite Voiture, soon to be known as the 2CV. The idea to make a simple peasant's car had started in 1935, and with Bertoni again instrumental in the design, prototypes were produced in 1939 and then hidden away during the war. In fact, it wasn't until the Paris Motor Show of 1948 that the factory went public with the 2CV, and the car was a sensation. It rapidly became a legend, the twin-cylinder air-cooled engine giving up to 60 miles to the gallon, the supple suspension famously capable of carrying a basket of eggs across a ploughed field with not one braking, and a roofline that took the tallest driver and his hat.
The 2CV was originally always to be known for the 39 saloon. When it came out for the 48 saloon, it was a second car. So it was really a car planned for the 30s, so it was revolutionary again, and it was planned for French people on the countryside and to work with. It was not a used car and a minimalized car as we think it today. It was really needed, necessary to have a car for people who never had a car before.
For a car that was meant to be a basic agricultural vehicle, it was used in more situations than this. In the promotional films, we see a wedding party enjoying a nice picnic. And the 2CV was also marketed as an affordable runaround for young lovers. In this film, a young couple have a delightful day out in their 2CV while still managing to write L'amour libre on the beach with their wheels. They would have only got one shot with the filming of this. They didn't have computer graphic enhancements in those days. Citroën hadn't just been creative with their vehicles, their advertising has been rather different too. Take this curious sci-fi advert for the 2CV van. Not sure if this 60s advert were to be made today, it'd get past both in terms of taste nor in the claims it makes. This pesky crow annoys the scientists so much that they take refuge in the back of the 2CV van. And then the blooming bird pecks the red button that triggers a horrendous nuclear explosion. So is this the end of the ad, if not the world? Of course not. From underneath the rubble, the Megaton blast drives a fully functioning 2CV. The 2CV may have been tough, but indestructible? No. Later, the 2CV became synonymous with expeditions for young people around the world. And for the 2CV Cross, the racing events which even I took part in. Great fun. The last 2CV was produced at Citroën's Portugal factory in 1990, by which time over 5 million examples of all types had been built. Coming up in part 3, how Citroën beat the world to a clutch of technological achievements, all packaged up in the legendary and stylish DS. Join us again soon. Hello, I'm Chris Goffey and welcome back to the Citroën story. So far we've looked at how André Citroën set up his company in Paris to enormous success, only to see the whole organisation go bust in the 1930s with the huge development costs of the Traction Avant. The Citroën talent for creating breakthrough cars continued with the perky little 2CV, and in this final part of the programme we'll come right up to date, starting with a car that really was a rolling testbed. I drove it on my visit to the Citroën Museum in Paris. This is the museum's six-cylinder car from 1954, as you can see, in beautiful condition. But it's an interesting car because it was an illustration of what was to come for Citroën, because it was fitted with hydraulic rear suspension, self-levelling from an engine-driven hydraulic pump. It was really a rolling testbed, because in 1955 came the sensation. It's doubtful there has ever been or ever will be a car that has so stunned the motoring press and public as the launch of the Citroën DS at the Paris show in 1955. Crowds fought to get a look at this stunning machine. 750 orders were taken in the first 45 minutes, and 12,000 orders had been taken by the end of the day. It wasn't just the looks, the sharp nose and the sweeping aerodynamic shape were more than enough to impress. But under the stunning shape, things were just as revolutionary. The steering, the suspension, the brakes, the gear change, the clutch were all powered by hydraulics. It was the Citroën Dream Team of André Lefebvre and styling by, again, the Italian sculptor Bertoni. The result was just fantastic. It's almost impossible to exaggerate how breathtakingly spectacular these cars were. I've owned 3 of them, and even today it's still difficult to find anything to rival the sheer comfort.
First of all, it had so many innovations. It was the first production car with disc brakes. It had hydropneumatic suspension, which was revolutionary, and no one had ever tasted the comfort. It was like riding on a magic carpet, so to speak. The shape, the indicators, it was the whole package combined. A monocoque chassis whereby all of the body panels can be bolted on and off. You can actually drive around just in the shell of the car, and it won't actually affect the rigidity of the shell. It's quite incredible. You can even take the roof off.
What's so great about Citroën cars, past and present, is Citroën, I feel, used to build cars for people who wanted to feel special and different to the rest of the crowd. When they built the DS, it was so radically different to the rest of the people driving, for instance, Peugeot 403 and Renault Frégate.
What was absolutely astonishing when they brought in the DS is that the hydraulic system was the main power for the suspension, the brakes, the gearbox and the steering as well. You had 4 functions combined with a single source of power. This was absolutely a technical breakthrough.
One of the great design features of the later DSs were these wonderful lights. Quartz halogen, they were very, very bright. And the great thing was the inner spotlight you see there. When you turn the steering wheel to a corner, the light swivels, so you can actually see round the corner. Wonderful design idea, and it really worked so well back in the 70s.
Cars you have today, they have a front grille, they have fixed headlamps. Everything about the design of the DS is no grille, swiveling headlamps for later models, hydraulic suspension, hydraulic steerings. I would say UK people love the DS. From the past experience I've had with customers coming to look at the cars I have for sale or coming to obviously to buy the DSs, they've all said, oh, I've been waiting for years and I've been saving for many years to buy myself a DS. Usually it's because their father, their uncles used to own a DS. They used to ride at the back of the DS.
Now you only have to look at these cars and the memories come flooding back. When I was a young reporter on the Staines and Egham News, I borrowed a test Citroën DS23 EFI off the Citroën press fleet, and I was in heaven. A week with a car like that as a young reporter. I went hurtling down to Devon in it. I stopped at a filling station. I checked the oil to make sure everything was all right, shut the bonnet, set off back down the road, coming up to about 80 miles an hour, and bang! The bonnet flew all the way back, bent on top of the windscreen, flattened down the roof. Tragedy, what could I do? I bent it back into shape and I did it up with rope and I drove back to Citroën. I said, I'm so sorry, it just came up on me. And they said, it's all right, so they all do that.
Right, the DS falls apart, and the problem areas of the DS is, first of all, there were cars built in the 70s where the rust proofing obviously was not as good as today's modern cars. The main area before you even consider buying a DS is to look under the chassis. The car is built like a box section. You've got to make sure that everything looks original, or if there has been any welding, it has to be perfect. Then you've got to start looking at the roof. The roof of the DS is made of fiberglass. Sometimes some roofs are made of aluminium, but the majority of them is made of fiberglass, sitting on a steel frame, and the sill obviously today's sills are pretty old, so they let the water in. The rain gutters, they also seem to suffer from rust.
Now, all DSs are beautiful, but some DSs are more beautiful than others. Malcolm Bobbitt, lovely ID19 here, and it's an English car.
Yes, it's a Slough car. It was built at the Citroën factory at Slough. Opened in 1926, closed in 1966. This particular car is a product of 1960. And it's the ID19, which was the detuned version of the DS19, which meant that it was a little more simpler, which the English motorists, or should I say British motorists, liked, because when they opened the bonnet of the DS19 and saw all that plumbing, they were horrified. And when these cars were the same price as a Jaguar, and in around 1958, 59, 60, what would you have bought? A Jaguar. But they brought out the ID19, which was simpler because it had a clutch, manual clutch, non-power steering, which was fine, but against
and a
the
proper four-speed gearbox as well.
And a proper four-speed gearbox without the mushroom on the floor.
They tell me that the site of the Citroën factory is now Mars.
That's
Mars
right.
bars.
Yes, Mars bars.
But when they left, they filled up the foundations with old gearboxes and engines and body panels from the old Citroën works. So what you and I have to do when Mars closes down is go back there with a pneumatic drill.
Yes, indeed, because trying to keep these cars on the road is always a job, and wouldn't we like to have lots of parts to be able to make the cars go on forever and forever.
So the owner of one of the most beautiful cars here, DS convertible, tell us about this car.
Well, thank you for saying it's beautiful. It is indeed. It's a 1965 DS19, which is the original version of the DS, which I bought about 7 years ago. It had been sitting in the corner of a Citroën dealer in Colwyn Bay. It needed a lot of work, as these things tend to. It had been written off after a minor accident in the 70s, and the owner of the garage had kept it, intending to restore it, but didn't actually get around to it, and it became an opportunity for me. So it's originally Chaperon, a coach builder in Paris, built them using the chassis and the front sections from Citroën. And I think he built about 1,365 of them, and about 100 of those, I say, were right-hand drive and came to this country.
The DS was to develop throughout its 20 years production run with facelifts, the famous steering spot lamps, fuel injection, estates, and even ambulance bodies. By 1975, when production ended, over 1.5 million had been built. It proved a tough competitor in the international rally world with a string of victories. Famously, in 1968, Lucien Bianchi was leading the London to Sydney Marathon when only a few miles from the finish in Australia, he collided with a spectator's car that shouldn't have been there. Talk about tragedy. Citroën's competition department flourished and continues to this day. Citroën knew the car was tough and was proud to show it in this promotional film where the DS keeps its cool, even when a tyre or two is blown out.
The shape of the future comes into focus with the latest Citroën. At a unique demonstration before press and public at Kyalami, SA Mirror takes a look at a ballet on 3 wheels, the wheel and turn of a Citroën cavalcade that spells out safety. The same startling safety factors are doubly impressive on a 2-wheel blowout. It's still a safe, controlled stop. Citroën's hydro-pneumatic system offers safety and convenience.
So Dale, head of vehicle design at the RCA, a very famous college for automotive design, surrounded by lovely shapes. What would your students make of this array?
Well, I think for many students, these cars represent the pinnacle of design at the time. I mean, an awful lot of students are still influenced by things like the DS even today. And I think when you look around at these cars, what you do see is a wonderful attention to detail and a wonderful amount of craft in the way that the cars are created and the surfaces are actually recognised and developed. It's very, very unusual.
And of course, they weren't derivative. I mean, you know, so many students, you see their work, and they've obviously taken their styling cues from something else. But this car didn't take its styling cues from anything.
Not at all. And what's really exciting again is that almost every model that's here, right from the 2CV, the DS, they're actually original solutions to real problems. And I think somehow we've lost that a little bit in the design business, where there is a lot of reinterpretation, looking at brand values and looking at the past all the time to find new directions. At this time, people were looking forward all the time and really being influenced by what was happening around them. So they were really responding to a social need, cultural need, and a need to find a new solution.
I mean, I have a theory that the motor industry researches too much and doesn't let designers have a clean sheet of paper anymore.
Yeah, I think the thing is these days is that actually the costs are so big that companies are really scared about taking a risk. You know, if you look at how much profit there is in a car these days, it's very, very small. I think companies are beginning to recognise, though, that to be successful, they need to be individual. And also, the consumer is pretty sophisticated. They've seen cars that are based on platforms and moved around, and they're getting to recognise that. So I think companies are recognising they have to go back to their roots and really, really do have to be innovative to find new things.
You might have thought, with the design of the Traction, the 2CV and the DS behind him, Bertoni would have sat on his laurels, but he also designed the extraordinary Ami, another car destined to become a huge favourite with French drivers. Now, in my day, in the very early 70s, they had a thing called the Ami Super, which was this car with the GS engine in. And that was a riot in London streets because, although it looked like a funny old modified 2CV, it was actually quicker than a Mini Cooper. So you could really burn people off at the lights. Talk about a wolf in real sheep's clothing.
The ME6 is a strange thing. Some people think that it is related to the 2CV. It is not. Technical, they use the basic thing they had learned by 2CV. But the ME6 is a result of Citroën's, it is a mark at this time which had 2 models, the 2CV on the one side and the D models on the other. So between the ID19, which was the lower model of D series, and the 2CV, there was a big gap. And it was planned to have a new car in the middle, a mid-range car. And the fruitful thing they made, this was the ME6. For the first time, Citroën had a mid-range car between these two after World War II.
Now, when I joined Autocar magazine as news editor in the very early 70s, to my great delight, my first long-term car was a Citroën GS, just like this. Flat 4-cylinder engine, beautiful aerodynamic shape, and with the DS-style hydraulics, it really was a great little car. Citroën at this time were experimenting with the rotary Wankel engine. They installed some in some Ami coupes, and they even built a version of the GS, the bi-rotor, with the Wankel engine. But it wasn't successful. They couldn't cure the emission and the fuel consumption problems, and in the end, they abandoned the idea. But they did try it in a helicopter. And to prove it, here it is. Bizarre sight in the middle of Citroën's own private museum in the centre of Paris. But this was a revolutionary helicopter, a very, very lightweight, a very compact power unit, and it worked extremely well. The helicopter actually flew on flight tests for quite a long time. But there was just no money to put it into production. Another great idea. The more I walk round this place, the more I find cars that I deeply and enviously covet. This is the mighty SM, Maserati engine, fantastic power steering. I was lucky enough to drive an SM a great deal in the 70s. It's finger light at parking speed, just one turn of the wheel from full lock to full lock, and at 100 miles an hour, it's iron hard. Fantastic car. You can buy one of these for, well under 10,000 quid. I want one now. Those SM lines were to play a part in a much more successful car from a sales point of view, the DS replacement, the CX. Some would say it's less revolutionary than the DS, but it looks good, has the Citroën hydraulics and a futuristic dashboard. Sold well too in both petrol and diesel and in saloon or estate versions. Later on came the GTI and the Turbo, making the CX a very quick car indeed. In 1976, Peugeot took a 90% stake in Citroën and set up the PSA Group, which combined both Peugeot and Citroën. Now, a lot of people thought that was the end of interesting Citroëns, but in 1982 came this, the BX. Okay, it had a joint Peugeot-Citroën engine, but it still had Citroën hydraulics, it was a distinctive shape, and it was a great car, and in diesel turbo form was immensely successful at introducing diesels to the mass market. My family bought 3 of them in a row. We thought they were absolutely great. The BX put Citroën squarely at the heart of the big volume car business, and to reinforce the identity of the brand, they started coming up with great adverts like this. Now, this is no computer generation. These are real horses galloping down real streets and across a real desert in the double chevron. Look very closely, you can just see the wires connecting the horses, but what a stunt, what a shot. It took them 8 days to get this one sequence. In 1986 came the AX, a collaboration with Peugeot, and in 1989, the XM. A new luxury model replacing the CX, XM was not one of the great sellers of all time for Citroën. They did have a few technical problems with them, but again, a great long-distance car. I remember driving a 3-litre 24-valve version from London to Barcelona against the clock to arrive in time for a television story, and we made it. In 1991 came the ZX series of cars to fit in between the AX and the BX. Called ZXs, but in fact absolutely nothing like them, either on the outside or under the skin, were these ZX Rally Raid cars. They were built to campaign in events such as the Paris-Dakar. Can you imagine what it must be like in one of these fearsome devices doing over 100 miles an hour straight across the middle of the Sahara? And now we're starting to come very much up to date. In 1993, the Xantia range was launched, and over the next 5 years, over 1 million were to be produced. Now, this car, the Xantia Activa, featured active ride suspension, and it's the best handling car I think I've ever driven, supercars included. This is my tip for a future classic. And you all know the rest. The Zara range, the outstanding success of Picasso, of Berlingo, the C5, and now the C2 and the C3.
My favorite Citroën car today would have to be the Pluriel, because to me it's so versatile, this car. You can have 4 different designs just by changing the roof, and there's no other cars today where you could do this.
These all different ways of being a single car you could find in a 2 chevaux. But it's not a retro design of the 2 chevaux, because you have to add the values that today a customer is expecting, and that obviously you don't have in terms of space, in terms of wideness at the elbow, in terms of safety, all these things that if you do retro design you would not obviously find.
French car design is very strong today in general, as the marque together with Peugeot in the PSR industrial production is very strong together. They are able and they show to have really good, revolutionary designed two cars like the C3 and in special the C3 Pluriel. And everyone, I never saw that collectors before loved so much a new Citroën since 20 years, and I'm a bit longer in the Citroën scene, like the C3 Pluriel. Now I know many people who came from the 2CV, from the DS, and they love the C3 Pluriel because it's a completely modern car, but never they try, and it was good that they do so, to copy their own history. So this is what others do. A retro design is nothing what Citroën or PSR wants to make, and I found it very, very good decided to do so.
And bringing us bang up to date, this is the C8 with the latest in Citroën technology, telematics. And that means that the car not only talks to you, it can repeat your text messages to you if you've got your SIM card in the system, but it also controls the CD, the telephone, the navigation system, the onboard entertainment. You name it, it can do it. I wonder what André would have thought of all of this. So the company is still there at the cutting edge for technology and innovation, but for Citroën enthusiasts like me, nothing can quite match the glory days of the wonderful Traction Avant, the 2CV and the immortal DS. Goodbye.